It's a super fight on Super Bowl weekend. Welcome into MMA Live. My name is Todd Grisham. Nick Diaz and Anderson Silva will return to the UFC to fight each other January 31st at UFC 183. To discuss this big bout, we welcome in from Las Vegas, Nevada, our MMA writer for ESPN.com, Brett Okamoto. And Brett, what were your initial thoughts when you heard about this matchup?
Well, 1 to 2 years ago, if you would have asked me about this matchup, I would have said it makes absolutely no sense to have Anderson Silva fight Nick Diaz. And even now, to a certain extent, I can say the same thing. Anderson Silva is a lot bigger than Diaz. Diaz has expressed an interest in fighting for a welterweight title again down the line. So why is he fighting a guy who weighs 185 pounds? Those are valid questions. But at the end of the day, this was really a no-brainer for the UFC considering where these two are at, respectively, in their careers. Anderson Silva was looking for just a fun fight to get back into the flow of things after suffering that gruesome injury we saw in December, that leg injury. And then Diaz, he just wanted a big, high-profile fight. He wanted a new contract from the UFC. He got both over the last couple of weeks. He signed on to fight Anderson Silva, and he signed a new contract, a 3-fight extension with the UFC. So it's a fight that we didn't really see coming over the last couple of years, but it's a fight that makes a lot of sense. It's an exciting fight for January 31st.
Well, let's talk about Anderson Silva for a second. He's 39 years old, coming off that horrific leg injury against Chris Weidman. How much do you think he's realistically got left in his tank?
Well, Anderson Silva has 8 fights left on his UFC deal. Does he fight all 8 of those? I'm not so sure that he does. You know, like you mentioned, he's 39 years old. He's facing his 40th birthday in 2015. So he's reached an age, really, where anybody, when they get to that point, any fight could be their last. But in terms of the injury itself that Anderson Silva suffered, that broken left leg, the fractured left leg, I've spoken to orthopedic surgeons about this, and he should be, as crazy as it sounds, as good as new when he steps into the octagon. There's really no threat of him re-breaking the leg. There is that metal rod still in that left leg to hold it together. He's free to throw leg kicks. Of course, there's a mental side of this. How comfortable does he look getting back into competition? I don't think that's something we'll really know until we see him in there. But just speaking to the leg injury itself, Anderson Silva should be fine. So I think he's got some miles left in his career if he really wants to pursue it.
As for Nick Diaz, it'll be nearly 2 years between fights for him. He retired, of course. No one believed he'd stay away, and we were all right because back he comes. He agreed to a 3-fight extension with UFC. The details of his new deal haven't yet been announced. But do you think it was worth it for him to sit out as long as he did? Is it a positive or a negative for Nick Diaz?
Well, I think it is a huge positive for Nick Diaz. You just look at the situation. He's coming off of back-to-back losses. The second of the two was not particularly close. He fought George St. Pierre at UFC 158 in March of 2013. He was dominated in that fight. He sits out but somehow remains in the headlines as only a Diaz can do, and he comes back to fight the greatest fighter of all time in a main event of UFC pay-per-view, and with a new deal that's going to pay him a lot of money to do it. And I asked Diaz, you know, are you happy now financially moving forward with the contract you signed? He said he has no complaints. They couldn't have given him anything else. So that, to me, sounds like a pretty good contract. So it worked out for Nick Diaz. Will it work out for anybody trying to renegotiate his contract with the UFC? Probably not. But for Diaz, it worked out for him in this case.
Well, let's hope Diaz pays taxes on all this money he's bringing in. He told us in the past he doesn't think he's ever paid taxes. Brett Okamoto, he's okay with the IRS, and he's okay with me, too. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Todd.
That'll do it for this edition of MMA Live. For complete coverage of all things mixed martial arts related, keep it right here. Until next time, I'm Todd Grisham. Keep fighting.